Yes, thanks very much. I'm delighted to be part of this conference, this international gathering.
Sorry
My
to
name is,
interrupt. Can you on slide share? Can you on slide share? Maximize
I
your
am
screen.
sharing. I am sharing
Maximize,
my screen.
maximize your screen. A cup shape on the right down bottom. Please click on that.
Oh, sorry, I can't.
On the
Sorry,
right,
just the way um, is it
sorry,
not easy to see?
on the right bottom.
I know I can't, just the way that I've set up my computer. I'm
Sure, sure.
sorry.
Okay, then. Please go ahead.
Can,
Sorry.
can people see it, sort of?
Yes, we can. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Um, So yes, my name is Nadine Changfoot, and my paper is titled Decolonizing Methodology in the Project Aging Vitalities Research Creation. And today I am going to share the decolonizing dimensions or decolonizing facets of my research partnership, Bodies in Translation Aging Vitalities project, which took place or is taking place in Peterborough, Nogojiwinong, Ontario, Canada. Peterborough, Nogojiwinong is a small city. It's about 1.5 hours east of Toronto. The purpose of Aging Vitalities, the research project, is to bring into the world new, diverse, and new cultural representations of aging, which talk back to the successful aging paradigm. The successful aging paradigm, which we all know, is around aging without disease and without impairments, without disability. In the Aging Vitalities project, 12 short multimedia documentaries or films were produced. The key decolonizing dimension of Aging Vitalities comprises ongoing partnerships with Indigenous peoples during and in knowledge mobilization of the research. My partnerships are with Nishnabeg elders. Nishnabeg is the Indigenous peoples of the area in which Trent University is located. And these traditional territories are of the Williams Treaties. So there are treaties between First Nations and the federal government of Canada. And the Williams Treaties comprises Treaty 20, as it's known in Canada. So what is decolonizing? Decolonizing is a commitment. It's a commitment that renders visible, it makes visible colonization as a historical and contemporary power relation. And what it does, decolonizing wants to create space for Indigenous knowledge and new settler possibilities. So for also settlers to unlearn colonizing, colonizing knowledge as well as norms that have been internalized through socialization of education, through the state, and so on. So decolonizing is a verb, according to scholars Eve Tuck and Wayne Young. And as an action, because decolonizing is an action, decolonizing is enacted iteratively. And in the iterations is generative of new possibilities, including research and community partnerships, as well as relationship building. So next, I want to bring attention to the Turo Wampum or Gazwenta, which is a guiding Indigenous teaching for me. I just realized I didn't move my slides forward. So this is a little bit about the Aging Vitalities Research Project, which I described in creating spaces where Indigenous elders and settler older persons can relate their own stories of and experiences of aging through the creation, through the direction, their own directing of their short videos. and it provides alternatives for revisioning relationships. And this is a photo of the workshop of Aging Vitalities, and you can see that it's a gathering, a very diverse gathering of Indigenous persons, racialized persons, older persons, younger persons, who directed their stories of their lived experience of aging. And now I'm on the Gizwenta, two-row wampum. So Gizwenta is the earliest known treaty in the land now called Canada. The treaty is between the Dutch and the Five Nations of the Haudenosaunee, which took place in the 17th century. And it's relevant in guiding my decolonizing practice. So in my work, I foreground the Indigenous principles that are symbolized within this wampum treaty, and that is of the principles of ongoing respect and reciprocity, not extraction, and relational accountability coming from the Cree scholar Sean Wilson. And these principles animate the work of Aging Vitalities. Indigenous peoples and settlers within the wampum shown are representative of the purple wampum. They're each on their own journeys as represented by the two parallel lines. And you can see that they don't overlap. They do not interfere with one another. They travel parallel in peace, friendship, and for all time. And these peace, friendship, and the all time aspect of the relationship is represented by the three parallel lines of white wampum. So I work in solidarity with Anishinaabeg Indigenous peoples of the Williams Treaties in the workshops of research creation. Meaning, what does this mean? It means that I seek partnership and co-leadership with Anishinaabeg elders as guides in envisioning research spaces. So I prepare myself for, and I'm open to tensions. And these tensions are generative. I find that working with Anishinaabe Kwewag or Anishinaabe women elders, they are very kind, compassionate, and also forgiving in their guidance. So there were moments during the project, during Aging Vitalities, when Anishinaabe Kwewag or Anishinaabe women's storytelling and settler storytellers were in friction. So there were tensions, and these were generative. So for example, settler storytelling around the ageism of gray hair revealed settler middle class privilege having to do with the expectation and anticipation of growing old as a matter of course. In comparison, Anishinaabe storytelling revealed that growing old is not a foregone conclusion or future. It's not a matter of course, given the histories of colonization, including of Indian residential schools within Canada and discrimination experienced in every facet of their encounters with settlers. In the Aging Vitalities workshop, settler storytellers were asked to listen and to deeply hear, right? Deeply hear in the heart the teachings provided by Anishinaabe Kwewag or Anishinaabe women. These teachings included the dissonance between Anishinaabe Kwe and settler women's experiences related to growing old, the disproportionate violence experienced by Indigenous women and girls. Just as people may know, there was the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and about 5 years on, there is still ongoing criticism of the Canadian government around its slow action in the over 200 recommendations from the inquiry. So there's this disproportionate violence that continues against Indigenous women and girls, as well as anti-Indigenous racism, and significantly lower resources available to Indigenous persons in education, in housing, in infrastructure, and the list goes on. So listening and respecting the Anishinaabe Kwewag's teachings really centered Anishinaabe women's ways in ways that honor them, and which also provided a moment of reflexivity. And what is reflexivity? By reflexivity, I mean reflection by settler women of their settler privilege, as well as my own. I'm a settler born and raised in southwestern Ontario of Canada, and how it becomes revealed and clearer when in the presence of Anishinaabe women. It also became a moment of agency going forward. As the scholar Roger Simon says, emotional responses are not enough. Change is also required. So there are some signs of change on the part of some of the settler storytellers. So I'll give some examples of some changes right now. So one settler woman exchanged contact information with an Anishinaabe Kwe elder participant who was also in the room, and they had a telephone conversation after the workshop. Another settler woman purchased a book of the Anishinaabe of Trout Lake in Northern Ontario, the home place of one of the Anishinaabe Kwe elders. Another storyteller, a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust, and another storyteller, an Anishinaabe Kwe elder, survivor of Canadian systems of Indigenous genocide, are now interested in meeting together to discuss their respective experiences of genocide, and for new possibilities. So I'm hoping that meeting will happen this year. Oops, sorry. Anishinaabe spaces, I'll speak to Anishinaabe refusals. So Anishinaabe spaces were created through what I will refer to as refusals. So inspired by the Mohawk scholar Audra Simpson, by refusals, I mean the refusal on the part of the Anishinaabe Kwe to provide immediate access to Indigenous knowledge on the part of settler women. So this also revealed Indigenous knowledge and Anishinaabe knowledge on Anishinaabe terms, which are generative in multifaceted ways. So I'll give an example. An example of Indigenous space being created and Anishinaabe space not to be immediately or even later accessed by settlers occurred through the film of Anishinaabe Kwe Ann Taylor. Ann Taylor is a revered Anishinaabe knowledge keeper in Curve Lake First Nation, which is very near Trent University. So Taylor spoke Anishinaabemowin, or the language of the Nishnabeg, in her film, and no English translations are provided. So I interpret this to disrupt settler privilege. It disrupts settler privilege in that it's really often assumed and perhaps expected that a non-English language needs to be translated for a predominantly English-speaking and reading audience. Or put another way, settler audiences conventionally feel the right to access non-settler language and spaces and historically appropriate them as well. By not providing English translations, the responsibility of viewers is to consider the language of the Nishnabeg, that is Anishinaabemowin, its history, its near destruction, and how learning Anishinaabemowin is part of an ongoing reconciliation process that is taking place in Canada since 2015. 2015 is when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission presented its final report. So I will now briefly share some of the partnerships that have occurred after the storytellers directed and created their films. So after the workshop, I really had no idea what kinds of partnerships would develop, but I did remain hopeful for them, even while there was uncertainty and anticipation. So I'll share stories of a couple of partnerships to date and one which is in process. All the storytellers agreed that their films could be submitted to Reframe Film Festival that takes place in Peterborough, Nguyen every January. And to our surprise and delight, all were accepted by the blind jury. And at Reframe Film Festival, another generative tension arose between Anishinaabe Quewag and settler storytellers. So following the teachings of the two Wampum that I shared earlier, I asked the Anishinaabe Quewag if they would prefer that their stories be screened apart, so separate from the settler women's story films. And they said yes. So I presented this to the artistic director, and they were very welcoming of this idea. There were some questions and disagreement among the settler women over the separation, and a desire expressed that the stories, the Anishinaabe Quewag and the settler stories, be screened together. But they were kept separate as per the wishes of the Anishinaabe Quewag, and this provided another opportunity for settler storytellers to consider that some spaces need to be kept Anishinaabe to center Anishinaabe knowledge. A second partnership was the partnership with the Anishinaabe Quewag and me to present an academic paper to the Conference of Indigenous and Native Studies Association. And the Anishinaabe Quewag have never had this experience. So what happened was we gathered at Curve Lake First Nation and co-created the presentation. And what I experienced was the following. I was really brought into a process of Anishinaabe Quewag togetherness and work, which is very different from the, how would you say it, conventional academic processes. And a lot of laughter is part of this. Laughter and joy is very much an important part of Nishnabeg, how would you say, processes. So these partnerships facilitate my accountability to the Anishinaabe Quewag storytellers for how their stories are interpreted and for the new concepts they support. So this includes, for example, Anishinaabe aging, where from the Anishinaabe films, life in older age has a cyclical quality through the incorporation of both younger and older experiences in relation with the land, and relations that are entangled and interdependent among the human and the non-human, that is animals, plants, earth, and water. A third partnership for a digital storytelling workshop at Curve Lake with Anishinaabe elders and youngers to direct and create their short documentaries occurred just a couple of weeks ago in May. So arrangements for that workshop were partnered and co-led with elders, artists, activists Alice Olson Williams and Elder Ann Taylor. And again, I would say that the partnership was significantly important to make sure that the ceremony, so life is ceremony for Nishnabeg, to make sure that ceremony was incorporated in a good way through the filmmaking workshop. So I'm coming close to the end now. You can see how the roles of storyteller, participant, and research partner, they can become overlapping and blurry. An example of this was the realization for me that I didn't feel comfortable at all writing about the Anishinaabe Quewag stories or films and the settler films in scholarly publication with especially the Anishinaabe Quewag having to cite university researchers when telling others how to access their own knowledge or indigenous knowledge. So in consultation with my scholar co-authors, I decided to ask both the Anishinaabe Quewag and the settler storytellers if they would like to be co-authors of a paper. And I was very delighted that they enthusiastically and excitedly said yes. And that's a risk to myself and my co-scholars, because if they said no, it would have been very challenging to think around how to mobilize the interpretation and analysis of their films without them. So this is an example of decolonizing, because the Anishinaabe Quewag knowledge and also the settler women's knowledge rests with the storytellers, not completely or singularly with the researchers. And relatedly, Canada's Research Council policy encourages knowledge mobilization partnerships with community partners. So I think that this is perhaps opening new pathways where researchers are going to have to partner with their community partners, especially Indigenous partners, in knowledge mobilization. As well, for myself, research-wise and knowledge mobilization-wise, I do feel that there is greater transparency and accountability with the storytellers, and also greater legitimacy of the theorizing and interpretation of the stories to the storytellers and their communities. So I'll conclude by saying that I hope that the decolonizing in my research project, Aging Vitalities, which is guided by Indigenous teachings of respect, reciprocity, and relational accountability, and which generates Indigenous settler dissonance and Indigenous refusals, inspires aging studies, commitments, and practices, both for decolonizing and systems change. So I'll just end on one note. One aspect of systems change I am finding from my partnership with Anishinaabe Quewag is that relations among more than one person, not individuals, become central. And this contrasts with university research, in my experience, because university research tends to assume individual and adult transactions, whereas partnerships with Anishinaabe include relations. For example, the inclusion of children, or having relations accompany a participant in research. Okay, thank you. That's my presentation. I don't know if I have time to show one of the films, which is 2 minutes.
Yes, please go ahead and share it.
Okay. All right, thank you. So in this film by Elder Ann Taylor, who is a knowledge holder and keeper of Nishnabeg in Curve Lake, she created a film, and you'll notice that Anishinaabemowin is primary throughout the film. You'll also notice that the kind of subjectivity or subject self-presentation is in connection with water, with animals, with plants, and with relations. Not in contrast with, for example, a conventional Western identification with a heteronuclear family. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my slideshow, and I'm just going to call up the film. And this film is short, so I'm now sharing the film. So I hope you enjoy. It's very short.
Me, before school even began, playing in the swamp, the smell of water, earth, decomposing leaves, weeds, the water warm but fresh, filled with salamanders, those navy blue ones with the white spots, shush coals, tree roots covered in moss, the water just underneath left over from Hurricane Hazel, the mash, bullfrogs, plum puddings, because the noise they make, that's the American bittern, whippoorwills and crows. Older now, my 8th birthday, my first LP, Helen Reddy's I Am Woman, Granny Liza, Zelda, Granny Gladys, Demoyeg. Loss, health issues, stubbornness born of necessity, daughters, loss, 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 lost, found, mental health, strength, resilience, courage, first-time love, ancestors, the land, ceremony, the land, language of the land, love your land, know your ground, grounded, growing on the land, Anishinaabe, Mongkwan, Demoye.
Okay, thank you very much.